For this first project, we're going to build a two-start barley twist candlestick holder. In this sample piece, we had two different types of wood. We used a zeracoti and an ebony because the grains complemented each other. To create the barley twist candlestick holder, we'll use 4 different router bits, all available from Magnate. The first is bit number 2704. It's an 1.25" surface planing bit. The second is 7554, an 1.5" barley twist. Then a 7504, which is a 3/8 point cutting roundover bit. And last, you can either use bit number 2008, which is a 3/8 diameter spiral upcut, or bit number S203L, which is a straight cutter as shown here. To start with, we cut a blank that is 1 3/4 by 1 3/4 by 10 inches long. We also cut the corners off on a table saw so we can make less sawdust on the machine. On one end, we used a 3/4 inch Forstner bit and drilled a hole approximately 3/4 of an inch deep. On the opposite end, we mounted the hub using 3 screws. We mark one of the tabs and one of the holes on the index drive center. That way, anytime we take this part out, put it back in, we'll put it back to the exact same location. We set the gears for a 1/3 inch pitch. You'll want to refer to your basic training videotape on the gear sets, but this is the setup to mill the stock to a round. Alright, we'll start by setting stops for the position and the movement of the router. At the headstock end, we'll set the pointer for 1.5 inches and put a stop at that position. At the tailstock end, we'll go to 10 inches, 10 inches being the length of the stock. Now when milling stock to a round, you'll remember from the basic training video that we offset the router. Instead of having it set at 0 or the center, we move it to the back side 1/2 inch, so we'll set the stop accordingly. The next thing will be to set the plunge depth. We'll just turn one of the flat surfaces up and plunge the surface planing bit, 2704, down until it just rests on that surface. And then we'll set the plunge bar at that position to make this first cut. With the split nut open, we'll position the router at the headstock end and make a cut around the circumference to check our plunge depth. Now you can rotate the stock and you see we've cut all the way around here. We do have a little bit of a flat spot on this surface, so we'll need to change the plunge depth just a little bit to remove that part right there. And then we'll make a second cut. Okay, now it is rounded all the way around. We're ready to mill the stock round the full length of the material. This time we'll close the split nut down onto the lead screw, bring the router over center, and mill it the length of the stock. Okay, now what we're going to do, we've just milled the body to this large diameter here. You'll notice there's a little flare at the lip. So we'll have to mill this section of the body about 1/8 inch deeper. The way that we'll do that is to adjust our plunge depth on our router. So we'll just take the plunge bar, loosen that up, and raise it approximately 1/8 inch and lock that in place. Now the router will cut that much deeper. Now to cut that lip at the top, we're going to move the stop at the tailstock end back to 9 1/8 inches and lock that in place. Everything else is already set. We're ready to mill it to a round. And now you can see the lip as it flares out. The stock is now rounded. We're going to cut the barley twist. So we'll set the stops. At the tailstock end, we'll set it at 8 1/4 inches. The headstock end, we'll go ahead and leave it right there at 1.5 inches. The y-axis, the router bit has to be centered, so we'll bring it to 0 and set the stop at that position. Next, we'll set the plunge depth. Now to set the plunge depth, you want to move the router off to the side. This is the barley twist router bit. We'll just set it so the shoulder or the tip of that rests right on top of the stock, and that will be the proper plunge setting. We're going to start by cutting the cove right here at the headstock end, and then we'll cut the barley twist. We'll actually do that in 2 passes, as you'll see. So there's the cove at the headstock end. Now we're going to raise the plunge or the router just a little bit so that when we make our first pass, it's not cutting the full depth. And then we'll come back with a second pass. We'll lock it on the lead screw right here and make our first pass. Now we'll simply crank it back to the starting point and set it for the full plunge depth and make the second pass. Alright, once the router gets to the end of the cut, we need to index for the second pass. The way we do that, if you remember from your basic training videotape, is we open the split nut and slide the carrier back, in this case 1.5 inches. That's the diameter of the router bit. Then we lock it back onto the lead screw, and then we'll drive it back to the beginning to make our second pass. Let's take a look at the stock right now and see what it looks like. Now if you look at the part, you see that we have a 3-inch pitch. The cutter's 1.5 inches wide, and again we're going to take the bit out of this cut, move it back 1.5 inches so it's centered on there, bring it back to the starting point and make our final pass. So we'll put this back to where it was at, replace my stop, we'll move it back 1.5 inches, drive it back up to the starting point. Again, we're going to make this in 2 passes, so I'm not going to plunge the full depth on the very first pass. Alright, now we'll simply open the split nut so we can cut around the circumference, keep it the same plunge depth, and bring it in to cut the cove at the end. Now this part is almost complete. We've got the cup at this end, our 2-start barley twist. We're going to cut a round tenon at this end. If you remember right, we've got 2 screws there. If we just cut into it, we'll cut those screws. The reason that we put 3 screws now is that we will simply remove the outer two and spin it on the center screw. And we'll use the mark here to put it back in the same place. Now you can see we've removed the two screws on the outside. There's only one screw in the center, so we won't run the bit into it. We'll now put this back into the machine, lining up the tab that we had marked so it goes back in the same location. To cut the round tenon at the end, we'll set the stop here at 3/8 of an inch and also at 5/8 of an inch on the left. Now the plunge depth, we're just going to arbitrarily choose one and then cut it oversized, measure it, and readjust the plunge depth. Now we'll just measure that diameter and take the reading and then make an adjustment to the plunge depth and recut that until it's a 1/2 inch in diameter. The last step will simply be to round over the lip of the cup. Here's the candlestick holder. Here's the tenon for the base, the barley twist, and the cup with the rounded lip. Next we're going to cut the base for the candlestick on the machine. We used a waste block and mounted a hub to it like so, and we'll stick this together with double-sided tape to mount it. This double-sided tape works extremely well and is easy to remove after you're done with it. Now we'll slide the tailstock up and lock that in place. And then tighten the tailstock to secure that and mark the center of that part as it turns. Next, we have raised in these slots on this tray, raised that up to the highest level so that it will clear the stock as it rotates here, and we'll then turn this round. The surface planing bit then was used to mill it round like this. You can see we've cut into our waste block, and we're not going to run into the screws at all this way. All right, now we're going to set the Z-axis so the center of the bit is right on the end of the stock and set the stop there. Next we're going to adjust the plunge depth so that the shoulder of the bit is right on the surface there. Now that we've got the stock rounded here, we're going to move our x-axis back about 1/16 of an inch, and then we'll index and make individual cuts all the way around here. So we set the stop back 1/16. We'll lock in our indexing pin to hold the stock stationary, and now we'll make the cut. we're going to use the same router bit, but just the tip of it, to cut a cove or a little groove right around the base of the pedestal. Obviously you can change this design any way that you want. For the last detail, we're using the 3/8 inch diameter straight cutter. We set two stops in the x-axis, one to keep the bit from running into the tailstock, the other one makes it cut about 1/16 of an inch deep into the face of the base. We've also set the plunge depth for about 1/2 inch, as you can see here, and we'll index exactly the same way. Now we've drilled a 1/2 inch hole on the drill press right in the center that was left. Now we'll take our part and just put it in there, and then of course finish it any way you want.